Modern collecting of retro gaming can be quite expensive, and as someone who constantly seeks to find these pieces of gaming history, it can carry quite a price. Even with my budget, there's some occasions where I just can't afford games, either because they're incredibly expensive or for less, I can afford many more games for a console of my choice. But talking about price points, it can be weird because the market is dynamic, and I felt the only way to really cover this topic is to create 3 different episodes. One focusing on expensive games that are practical to buy, expensive games that are impractical to buy, and ones that are so rare you'll likely never see it in person. Today, I'm going to cover the ones that are impractical. These games are just fucking expensive to be expensive, and more often than not are tied to late or limited releases for the NES. And as such, you're going to pay what I would consider an unreasonable amount of money. Let's begin. Oh wow, a Toaplan game. I didn't even know they had American NES releases. Just kidding. I played the shit out of Tiger Heli so much that it was a meme in the earlier years of me streaming. Toaplan is a mean company. They have mean games. If you recall in a previous episode, I said SNK is notorious for kicking you in the dick, and Toaplan is the company holding you down as you get kicked in the wiener. And if we were to go further, Team Shanghai Alice is giving a thumbs up to the companies holding you down and kicking you in the ding ding. Those are the people who made Touhou, the most infamous line of bullet hell games ever. But here we are playing Toaplan Snow Brothers, which was originally an arcade game, a decent one as well. It reminds me of Data East's Tumble Pop. In Snow Bros, we play as Nick and Tom, who work through various stages, throwing snow at enemies until they turn into snowballs. We can then kick them into walls, or we could use the snowballs to take out other enemies along the path. It's quite nifty. Then they ported it to the NES, which is considered a rather inferior port of the game. Many people suggest the Mega Drive version instead. If you do want to play the NES version, you'll need roughly $650 and patience to understand that this version plays slightly different from the arcades and maintains its own story sequence that differs from the arcade original. When I started my retro gaming journey, this was one of the games that popped up as the most expensive titles you could get, right? Obviously, through time, I've uncovered a lot more, and I've learned about the companies that made these games. And in the case of Panic Restaurant, it was created by EIM. EIM stands for Entertainment, Imagination, and Magnificence, which is a fucking bold statement for a company that had 7 games before shitting the bed. You know what's funny? Kenji Eno? I don't think he learned his lesson, because then he proceeded to make another company called Warp. And that one shit the bed too. If you've never heard of Warp, they made the D series, D2, Enemy Zero, that line of games. As a company, EIM only made 2 NES games, Panic Restaurant and Casino Kid 2, both of which are considered rarer titles. But for me, the only thing that's impressive about Panic Restaurant is how fucking terrifying the front cover work is. If I was eating at this restaurant, I would panic. This is insane. Look at that dude's face. In the game, we play as Chef Cookie, and we walk through our own restaurant and deal with this absurd curse from a rival chef named O'Dove, a play on hors d'oeuvre. The curse makes all of our food turn into evil monsters, and we need to destroy them through 6 levels before taking on O'Dove to remove the curse. It's got a very cutesy vibe, which kind of makes sense why Taito published this. They loved cute characters, especially Bubble Bobble. That being said, this game will cost you $700 on average, and that's if you're lucky. Bonk Adventure. This is a game that is an example of a downgrade. I don't mean that disrespectfully. I'm referring to a downgrade as a video game that originated on next generation hardware that was ported to the previous generation. Think of Sonic on the Genesis and its Sega Master System port. That's what Bonk Adventure is to me. It began on the TurboGrafx 16, and in my opinion, it's a must-play on the console, where it's eons more affordable. The NES version, I haven't messed with it because I own the TurboGrafx 16 version. In fact, it's one of the few TG16 games that I own, because the collection economy jointly for PC Engine and TG16 is fucking atrocious. Now, Bonk itself, it's a fun game. We play as Bonk, a little caveman boy who goes around whacking people with his comically oversized forehead, annihilating dinosaurs and assorted animals with blunt force trauma. It's basically Zinedine Zidane's wet dream. Occasionally we find meat, which makes Bonk go more ballistic than an inner city 3 a.m. Circle K crackhead, and we can decimate the enemies, and in the case of the third stage of that meat collection, we're invincible for a little bit. One of the cooler aspects of this game is that on the TG16 we can utilize the turbo functions to spin damn near infinitely, which aids in the tactics of playing it. But on the NES, that's not the case, at least not without a turbo controller, and even then, it's a little different in execution than the original version. If you want this game, be prepared to drop $800. Loose. There are more Bonk games, as this is a legacy franchise, with the most recent title being Bonk's Return on J2ME platforms. This game was developed by Natsume. Yay, I love talking about Natsume. They've yet to let me down as a developer. Power Blade 2 is obviously the sequel to Power Blade in 1990, which was jointly developed by Natsume and Taito, and in it we play as Nova, and our objective is to restore the master computer. We have a boomerang which we can throw omnidirectionally, that is to say 8 different directions, and a few power-ups that can aid us in our journey. Many folks I've talked to about this, they didn't realize that Natsume and Taito made a sequel, which they did with Power Blade 2. Again, we play as Nova, and we're on a mission from the Department of Defense on a quest to destroy the Delta Foundation. We can choose which stages to go through, and get various suits which act as power-ups. To me, this is Taito's take on Mega Man, and I didn't really consider it until I put some time into playing it. It is expensive though, costing roughly the same as Bonk's Adventure, $800 on a good day, and I hope you're having a good day, because I've seen this game go for much more than that. Well, this is Color a Dinosaur. In the game, we color a dinosaur. I don't know what the fuck to say. We color a dinosaur. Who made this? Oh, yeah, Farsight Studios. They're known for bangers such as Action 52 on the Sega Genesis. They also made one other NES game, Videomation, which is just as silly as Color a Dinosaur. It's funny though, many times people consider this to be one of the worst NES games of all time, but I disagree. This game was created for the 3 to 6 years old demographic, and I don't know many 6-year-olds whipping out fucking Ghosts and Goblins or Ninja Gaiden, so if I wanted to have a game I knew that my daughter Aria would find interesting, if not for a few minutes, it would be this. The first NES game my older daughter Faith played was Mickey's Safari in Letterland, and for what it is, she loved it. I will say this is our first 4-digit game of the episode. You will pay $1,000 or more, and I cannot justify that. For $1,000, I could probably buy the entire stock of coloring books from all 3 of my local Walmarts. Want to guess who made this one? Natsume. I'm excited to see how Natsume had a plethora of NES games that I've never heard of. It's always a little treat when I get to include them on our lists. Dragon Fighter was published by a little lesser known company though, Softful, which only published 7 games ever, 5 of which were on the NES. Casino Kid, Speedball, Wall Street Kid, Casino Kid 2, and Dragon Fighter. The plot of Dragon Fighter is relatively normal. It's set in this place called Baljing. The land was peaceful until Zabaong, an evil warlock, decides to do some fuck shit, and the only way to deal with said fuck shit is to do your own fuck shit, and that comes in the form of people of Baljing resurrecting an ancient unnamed warrior from a statue. This is the protagonist that we play. We go up against Zabaong to avenge the people of Baljing, and honestly it's a good game. We can shoot projectiles, and we can upgrade those projectiles by way of certain pickups, but it is a tough one. We have limited lives and even more limited continues. If you want to accept the challenge of Dragon Fighter on true hardware, you're going to need to set aside $1,000, much like Color a Dinosaur, but when push comes to shove, this is way more worth it to me. Stackup is one of the first NES games released, mostly because it was tied to a gimmick called Rob the Robot. Rob is able to execute commands from the consumer and acts as the player too, guiding Hector through moving colored blocks on the screen. It's a very rudimentary game, and honestly the only reason I would want one is to let my kids experience the uniqueness that was Rob. For those of you who don't know, Rob was a zapper light gun dressed up in a robot cosplay, and how it interacts with the NES is pretty unique. The problem is, Rob itself, he's not affordable in today's collection economy. Without all the bells and whistles required for Gyromite and Stackup, you're looking at about $120, which isn't so bad. For the Gyromite setup itself, you're looking at about $500 for Rob and the tops and the cart. That's not bad. But what if you wanted to play Stackup? That's where it gets a little bit more tricky. Complete in box, Stackup is roughly $1,000, which is what you'll need because it comes with the pads and the attachments needed for Rob. If you already had a Rob, though, you could probably get away with investing about $600, $700. The Flintstones is a time-cherished television show and a line of vitamins. If you know, you know. From being an amazing television show to having a series of movies, it was an IP that was capable of being used and abused to make various games, which they did first in 1986 with Yabba Dabba Doo on the Amstrad CPC, and in 1988 with the Flintstones on the Sega Master System. The first NES game was The Rescue of Dino and Hoppy, which is a common game, roughly $40 tops. Then we get to the problem child, Flintstones The Surprise at Dinosaur Peak, which was developed jointly between Soul Corporation and Taito as an extremely late release for the NES, 1993. Occasionally we have some myths that float around in the video game industry. My favorite one is that certain games were only available in Blockbuster. The two games that I can think of off the top of my head that have this applied often is Hagane, The Final Conflict, and this game, Flintstones Surprise at Dinosaur Peak. But I've never seen any solid evidence that confirms that. Regardless of what the myth says, this game is still incredibly rare to own, and if you want to play as Fred and Barney, going through the motions of working with a pterodactyl to get to the top of a volcano to take on the legendary fire dinosaur, you'll need about $1,200. I personally chalk this up to the fact that Taito, they didn't advertise this game well at all, and most of the NTSC copies were provided to South America over the US market. This is a game that I've also seen fluctuate. Sometimes it's $800, but it can suddenly jump to $1,200, and it's all based on how much money somebody wants. This one is a rare one, yet occasionally it pops up. This is an unlicensed game created by Color Dreams, the same folks who created tons of absolute nonsense on the NES. And then at some point they said, you know what America needs? Jesus. And from the ribcage of Color Dreams was born Wisdom Tree. And thus the Lord said, they shall not inherit the seal of quality, because I know for a fucking fact that Moses can't carry 15 barnyard animals above his head. Challenge of the Dragon is a $1,500 game. In fact, there's one on eBay right now. So if you want a rare yet silly game from Color Dreams, feel free to get it. Now the thing that sucks is that finding any information about Color Dreams games is tough, right? They were obscure, silly, nonsensical creations from a company that really didn't know what they were doing. The story though, that's where it really matters, right? This is one of the best plot lines I've ever seen in an NES game, and it goes something like this. We play as Sir Berkalot. He's a knight whose girlfriend, Lady Nanita, was kidnapped. By who, you might ask? Why, none other than Dinawan the Necromancer. Now usually, I'd leave it at that, but there's something in this manual that really got my attention. We learned that Dinawind was just a normal, everyday kid. Until, and I shit you not, disaster and puberty struck, rendering poor Dinawind a walking testosterone magic machine with an eye for causing mischief. Oh fuck, I don't think y'all realize how hard it is to read that. Color Dreams is still around. They make IP cameras, no more no less. Well, you knew this was going to be here. It's the game people talk about when you discuss the most expensive games that you're likely to find at a trade show or even at a retro game store in a showcase. It's also one of the most reproduced video games on the NES, because scammers out there know that they can snag someone who's inexperienced into paying a little bit for a game without knowing what red flags to look for. I might make a video on reproduction cards to educate everyone on how to identify fakes out there, so comment down below if that's something that you would be open to. I'd love to make it. Little Samson itself is a late-era game from Takeru, and published by Taito, which if you've been watching this series, Taito published a lot of stuff for the NES far after the lifespan was coming to a close. We play as Little Samson, and we have a motley crew of other animals that we can use specifically to overcome the trials of specific stages. It is a beautiful game, but you're going to have to crank out about $2,000 for it, and that price is shared between various qualities of the game. Personally, I find the game to be incredibly overrated. Little Samson really didn't do anything that was unheard of at the time, and the sole reason why it's so expensive is because of how late it was released in the NES's lifespan. And of course the limited quantities. For many people, this game is the final checkmark in owning a library that doesn't involve Holy Grail items, myself included. One day I'll own it. And that's it for today's list. What did you think about it? Are there any games on this list that you own or would love to? I'd be curious to hear about it, and I'm sure the rest of the community would as well. We are stupid close to reaching our milestone of 4,000 subscribers, and at the time of this video being uploaded, we're at 3,986, and that's so cool to me. Thank you so much for helping me accomplish that number, and should we hit it, I'll do a special episode that the community can vote on. Finally, the single most important thing you can do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly impacts the visibility of videos and the projects that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes, Fortefyre out.